Record here. All right. So we are recording this webinar, and we will be posting our recordings here on our irrigation grant applications page. So if you missed these and you want to come back to them, or maybe you're here and you want to come back to them, I guess, all of our recorded sessions are here. And Catherine so kindly put those on YouTube, so we don't need to log in for those. So, all right. Well, it looks like we have a couple of participants, but Erin has been getting quite a few questions this last week or so. And so I thought we would kick the session off by answering some of the questions that Erin's been receiving for the grant applications. And then we'll kick it open to the participants to ask questions. And you can either do it in the chat in the QA/QC, or you can raise your hand and we can allow you to talk. So Erin, do you want to go ahead and kick off some questions?
Yeah, so you know, I've been getting a lot of different questions from folks who are interested in applying, and one of them that I got yesterday was related to the schedule to fill out the schedule document and the filling out or putting together a budget narrative. And we understand that there's probably some details in those things that you guys might not have completely squared away, which is totally fine. Especially for the schedule, just make sure that you give your best guess for those. Some of these things will not be applicable. So DEQ review for the plans and specs, probably not going to be applicable for these projects, but the permit and other agency review and approval likely will. So if you have just a general idea of when you anticipate those of being done, especially for water rights too, make sure when you are putting together your application that if you think something will need to be done to your water rights, if it's just a change, please reach out to your DNRC regional office and just chat with them and see, if anything needs to be done. For some minor changes, likely nothing will need to be done, but if it's a more involved change, they will give you an idea of what will need to be done on your end and about how long that process will take. And so don't be surprised if when we are reviewing your applications, if we shoot you a message and ask, if you have talked to DNRC, and if so, to provide a brief little write-up, or even if you reach out via email, attaching those emails, just because that will, be taken into account when we take a look at your schedule and just the lifetime of that project. So yeah, those are kind of just the big things with the schedule. Put an estimated date if you haven't gotten to those portions of the project yet. If you have an actual completion date, please put those in there, but just do your best for these. Related to the engineering and procurement part, I have gotten quite a few questions on those. It is not a requirement for this application to already have hired an engineer. Engineering is eligible under this application. Just know that if you do have an engineer on board and will be asking for us to reimburse engineering expenses, that we will be asking for your procurement documents. So just be aware of that. And I think that's all I've really had related to the schedule. Autumn, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add for that part.
No, what Erin said is right. So if you're thinking about what your estimated completion date, you can just give us a month and the year. And if you're having a hard time filling this out, like you don't know, sorry, I filled in the DEQ one. I thought I put that in the August or the permit one, but if you don't know how long it's going to take for an agency to review your permit application and approve it, you might want to reach out to that specific agency. And if you don't know what permits are required for this, we did provide the stream permit, like in the application materials, we did provide the link to the stream permitting documents. And it gives kind of a, who does what permits and, how long it takes, might vary by agency. So definitely do some research into that, because we will definitely make sure that, all the permits are taken care of for these projects before you go to construction. Also, MIPA and NEPA has to be done as well, and that has to be submitted and worked with DNRC. And so the checklist that we have, it's online as well. You don't necessarily have to have that to apply, but you need to make sure you budget adequate time in your schedule to get that done before you can go to construction. So I think that was it for the schedule, but back to what you kind of started with, Erin, was about the budget narrative. So do you want to talk a little bit about the budget narrative? And I'm going to pull up the guidelines and try to scroll down to that budget narrative piece while you're talking.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, so in addition to the 2 budget tables that we ask you to upload for the application, we also want you to upload a budget narrative. And the purpose of that is to basically just show us how you arrived at the costs that are in your budget. So just explaining the math that was used. So for the administration, if you are going to be asking for any just any reimbursements for the administration, please just show us the estimated number of hours. You can include a general rate, and if there's going to be any sort of accounting services or legal or even audit, depending on who the applicant is. For equipment, materials and supplies, like it says, describe and itemize the equipment requested. Just give your best guess. If all you have is an estimate, that's totally fine. Please attach those with it. For any of the engineering, this is where it might be good just to reach out to an engineer and just say, hey, this is the type of work that we are thinking about. Would you be able to put together some type of a quick estimate for us that we can use for the budget? And same with construction too. We understand that the actual costs may change, especially with all of the supply issues that folks have been encountering, but just give your best guess. Once you are awarded, we will ask you guys to fill out another final budget. And so don't worry if that changes a bit. Just do your best. I wouldn't stress out too much about it, but basically we just want to make sure in the budget narrative that you have really put the thought into this project as far as what it's going to cost, and that we know that it is going to be reasonable and viable. And if we see any red flags, we will kick the application back to you guys and ask for you to revise the budget narrative. And so when we do that, as Autumn has mentioned before, that will kind of reset the clock of when we take a look at the applications, because this is a first come, first serve type of program. So please do your best when you are putting your application together. Please don't rush through it, because the quicker you are going to be in putting it together, the more likely you are for mistakes, and we will have to kick it back to you. So yeah.
I was just going to add one thing on budget narratives too, Erin, is that, and it says right up top, is that narratives should be written in such a way that someone who's not specifically familiar with the project can understand the rationale, the purpose, and the calculation of those costs. So, you know, as you're breaking out your administration, you'll say, you know, whatever person on the staff, in order to do the reporting and track finances, you know, this is the number of hours, this is their rate, here's the total. You know, if you include legal services in administration, why do you need legal services for this, right? So in order to review the right of way, things like that. Equipment, so if your project, you know, say you're going to purchase the liner for a canal directly, you know, you would say liner for canal, this many feet, here's an estimate from a provider, a service provider. You know, engineering is that, do you need preliminary engineering, you know, final design, construction oversight, and then a breakdown of those costs, like, you know, who's going to do what, how long it's going to take, you know, how we get to that dollar amount. And then finally, construction. So construction cost estimates can be quite lengthy, but what we want to see is that you are realizing that there's some major construction tasks in there. So do you need excavation? So how much is excavation going to cost? You know, do you need installation of a head gate or installation of culverts? How much is that going to cost? How much is the reshaping, revegetation going to cost? That kind of thing. So those kind of bigger ticket items that go into construction, and then how they're estimated. So estimating construction cost is a fine art. And usually, you know, engineers that do these projects will have a pretty good idea of what things cost. But if you don't have an engineer on board and you're putting together a construction cost estimate and you say, I don't know, it seems like a $30,000 job for construction. How did you get there? How did you guess that it was $30,000? Was it a similar project that was done with a similar scope? In which case, you know, what was the scope of that project and how much did things cost, right? So there is a per unit cost associated with each of these items. And it's really important that you walk us through the logic behind those, you know, lumping everything up to construction. There's a lot of pieces in there. So this is your opportunity to say, you know, mobilization is going to cost X amount, excavation is going to cost this much, and, you know, really kind of give us a breakdown of what that project looks like. You know, if you have to do reseeding or plant trees or something like that, how much are those going to cost? How many trees are you going to buy? And, you know, this is a huge thing, but what the issue with submitting a budget without a good budget narrative is we don't know if the project is financially or technically feasible without looking at a justification like this. So if you just throw together like, hey, this construction is going to cost 30,000, we need to have some sort of supporting documentation on that that justifies that cost. Otherwise, we don't really know what, if the project's feasible. Maybe the construction costs $100,000 and you're going to be 70,000 short, and you know, we'd be recommending funding for a project that actually isn't feasible. So this is really about making sure that the grants are made in a wise, you know, investment. So if you have a tech memo or a preliminary engineering report and it's old, so say it's like, you know, 2012, your budget narrative should at least reference that old PER and then walk us through the cost adjustment. So how was that cost adjusted for inflation? How was that cost adjusted to like current day expenses? So you can reference older documents. You just have to walk us there so we can look at a construction estimate from a PER and a budget item and they don't match, and here's why. So again, you have to really connect the dots for us. The other part about budget narratives too is that if certain entities, so say NRCS is going to pay for only a certain portion of this project, you know, the budget narrative is where you can tell us that. So you can say NRCS is going to pay for this, that, or the other thing. And so the ARPA funds are really going to go towards construction. You know, great. That's a really nice companion to that budget document. It really helps us. If you're going to do in-kind match, the budget narrative is where you're going to tell us about that in-kind match and how you calculated that amount. So that's just a few things about the budget narrative. And, you know, when we did the irrigation competitive round 1, when we had applications that did not supply a budget narrative where we could justify the cost for the project, we actually limited the amount of funds recommended for those projects because we just couldn't verify the construction costs. And we couldn't verify, you know, a lot of things in those. So this is really key for us to say, yes, this budget is good, this is sound, because DNRC's responsibility here is that we have to certify that these projects are eligible uses in ARPA. And, you know, again, that has a lot to do with has success, can meet these metrics in the time period given. So that was just a little bit of a soapbox about budget narratives there. And then I wanted to, while we were sharing screens, talk about the budget tables, if that helps Erin as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one thing I'll just add to, ARPA cannot pay for reimburse expenses related to water rights. So that will be another thing where if there are any costs associated with water rights in your budget tables, we will kick that back for you to revise.
Mm-hmm.
So,
correct. So a couple of things about the budget tables is that table 1 is actually probably the second table you fill out. So let's start with table 2. And so in the application materials, I did include the table 1. This is a drop-down one that you can fill out. Here's some instructions. And do we have an example? And we did have an example in here. So this is what it should look like when you're all said and done. But you really want to start with table 2. And this is actually comes in Excel format. So you can delete columns if they don't apply to you. So in Excel, this is a PDF, but in Excel, you can delete the columns that don't apply for you. You can rename these columns. You can delete tasks in here that don't apply to you. So if you don't need legal services, you can just go ahead and take that line out. If you have other things in there, you need to specify what those other expenditures are. In the activities down here under like the, the actual project activities. So the reason administration sits up there is usually administration is money that stays with whoever gets the grant. So administration, if you're Park County and you apply for this grant, administration is money that stays with Park County. So we're paying for, grant management to Park County. We're paying for some other professional services to Park County. The stuff below administration is generally contracted services. So that's kind of the breakout here, why there's two different groups. So generally, every project's different. We have all kinds of different projects, but we have these just big kind of organizational tasks. So project management, preliminary design, equipment, final design, construction, contingency, or if there's other things. And so really what you're doing is you're doing your budget narrative, you're walking through the math, you're filling in, your total costs, right? So you're filling in what this project's actually going to cost. And then you piece it out and you give different parts of that budget to your different funding sources. So if you're using an ARPA irrigation grant here and you just want to pay for construction with that, awesome. Give us the number in construction that you're going to use. And then for, say you have match from NRCS, that's going to go somewhere in here as well. Say your other one is local funds, local contribution, and that's your other one. And so all these columns are going to total up and match the total project cost. So with that, then you go back up to table 1 and you say, okay, well, I'm asking for this much, and this is a competitive grant, right? So I'm asking for $250,000 in my competitive grant. I'm matching it with, again, these are kind of some generic areas, or these are kind of some traditional funding sources areas that you guys probably aren't going to use. So you're going to go down here and you're going to say NRCS emergency watershed grant, something like that, and give us the amount of that emergency watershed grant. And then you're going to say, is this federal funding? Yep. And the status of commitment is funds are committed. And then you're going to give us a date that the funds were committed. And this date is going to correspond to the letter or some other award notification from that fund with that same date on it. So anyway, that's just kind of my little kind of how to do a budget 101. These things automatically total as well. So if you go in here and you put in 250,000, and then you see this is already starting to total, and let's say the project is going to cost 250,000 on their part, all of a sudden you see you're at 500,000. So that's kind of my just kind of budget, how to fill out the budget 101. Does that make sense, Erin?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, awesome. Any other questions that you came up that you've had come into you specifically on this, Erin?
Not for the budget tables. I have had quite a few questions about UEIs and SAM.gov registration. And we don't have SAM registration as a requirement for the application, but we do encourage you to start the process early. So if you are planning on applying, please, at least start that process, because folks are having quite a difficult time getting it. SAM.gov is really backed up. And so the sooner you're able to start, then the sooner, we can move things along once the project is awarded. And you will need to acknowledge that an active registration is required because ARPA is federal funds. And if you are sponsoring, if you are applying on behalf of another entity or a landowner, know that they are also required to register within sam.gov. I did have a question specifically yesterday about whether they needed to do the full sam.gov registration or just register for a UEI, a unique identifier, unique entity identifier. And so you need to do the full-blown registration with sam.gov. Just having a UEI number will not suffice. We will ask for proof of the registration.
That's right. If people already have their UEI and their registration, we just ask that you give it to us. So if you already have it done, great. Pop it into the application and then upload. You can do a screenshot of your active registration. But again, you do not need to have this done to apply, but we will not be able to issue an award, or I guess get into an agreement without the sam.gov, because you cannot receive federal funds without having that registration done. We do have guides and everything else on here. sam.gov is totally out of our control, and we have very limited ability to assist people with sam.gov. But just know that it does take some time and it's not easy to do.
Yeah, it can take, I think the quickest is several weeks. So just be aware of that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are pretty much the kinds of questions that I've been getting. Yeah.
Well, I did get a question that's a really good one today, is that what time are we opening the applications on the 1st? And we'll open them at 10 a.m. So we'll update the website and everything else, but those will officially open at 10 a.m. on the 1st. So we wanted to give ourselves time to get into the office and push buttons and everything else. So those will open at 10 a.m. And just a reminder too, you can only have one draft. You can only have one application in draft at a time. And so we recommend you have all of your application stuff done and like offline or on your computer, so that when you open up your draft, you can just dump everything into there from your application material saved to your computer, and then hit submit. And then if you're going to submit another one, do the same. So the other one that came up yesterday during the commission meeting was that we talk about how this flood response was to this flooding that occurred during the spring of 2022. And the commission want to make sure that flooding that occurred even into July would be covered by this program. So we'll go ahead and make some brief updates to the application materials to just reference flooding that occurred in 2022. So it won't necessarily have to happen just in the spring. It'll anytime in 2022.
Another question I did get that's just related to when we open up the applications, when we are going to be determining, the order as far as, first come, first serve, we are not going to be looking at the hour and the minute that these were submitted. Autumn, you can, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we were just going to look at the general day and then use the match as the tiebreaker for that.
I think we will, Erin, we will have to look at the hour that they are submitted.
Okay.
So we will have to.
Well, I meant like hour and the time, like we won't, if one is submitted at 10:58, and the others at 11:05. You know, we're not going to get that, you know, picky about it, but
What we will get picky about though is that if people submit incomplete applications just to get their foot in the door,
yeah,
those will get sent back to you to complete and fill out, and then we will not consider that a complete application until it's resubmitted with everything in it. So missing check boxes, missing signatures, incorrect signatures, things like that will all get your application sent back. So
Yeah, this is Michelle. I think I would just clarify, just having listened to that response, I just clarify that we are going to review them in the order they come into DNRC. But what matters in terms of, you know, them, you know, what matters is the completeness of the application. So it's when we mark it complete that it goes forward, and that's the order that really matters. I mean, we'll review them in order, but then we'll likely, in most of these applications cases, honestly, there'll probably be a few little things to fix, sometimes a lot of things to fix, but even the most complete one might have one or two small things. So we'll get back to you. We'll say, hey, we need these fixes. And then if you fix them correctly, adequately, then we'll go ahead and mark it complete. And that's what actually matters, is when that happens. So, you know, if you've got a ton of fixes and somebody else behind you had only one small fix and they were able to do that because they submitted a more complete and full and complete application, then that's, you know, that's the way the cards fall, really. So that's what we'll really be looking at, is when we as the NRC have considered an application fully corrected and complete and eligible, and mark it as such.
yep. All right. Okay, so we did get a question posted in chat. How do private landowners apply? So private landowners do not apply. Private landowners need to work with a local government in order to apply. So local governments are any city, county, consolidated city, county, school district, regional water authority, water district, sewer district, irrigation district, water users association, conservation district, or tribal government. So if a private landowner needs assistance, they need to connect with one of those local governments, and the local government will submit the application. The private landowner, however, will be on the hook for a lot of these questions and answers, because those local governments are pretty swamped right now. So they're definitely going to want to get together all this information and give the local government as complete of details as possible, and work with that local government to apply. All right. Any other questions or anything like that from the ARPA team before I say raise your hand or submit a question? And if you're the one that's calling in, if you're the phone number that's calling in, there's a special way to do it when you're a participant. Let's see. I think, okay, so I allowed you to talk, so you can hit *6 to unmute if you're the one that's calling in. I will just add as a reminder, while we wait to see if the participants have any questions, I will just add a little reminder that Department of Commerce and Alicia Ullerman is on. I just saw her there. Let's see. She's with Department of Commerce. I just moved her to a panelist, so when she moves, she could jump on and say hi to us. But Department of Commerce does have technical assistance, which could include up to 20 hours of engineering technical assistance for a local government to apply for these grant funds, or you can chat with the very nice staff at Commerce and they'll kind of help you walk through an application as well. So
That's correct, Autumn. And I'll jump in really quick. I will put my email address and phone number. Do we have a chat? Yes, in the chat. And you can send those requests directly to me, and then I'll work with you on getting those assigned out. What I need in the email is just a couple sentence description of your project, and if you're currently working with an engineer, and then we'll work out the details. So I'll throw that in the chat here.
thanks, Alicia. Right. Do we have any other questions on applications? And for the person that's calling in, the best way to get a hold of Alicia is 406-841-2226. Again, that's 406-841-2226. All right. Well, I can hang out. I'll shut my camera down and stop share, and I can hang out for a few more minutes if anybody has any questions. If not, I'll probably end the meeting here about 1:45. And we'll post a recording of this online as well. So thank you to the ARPA team and Alicia for jumping on. And yeah, looking forward to Monday. So, all right, thanks everyone. All right, well, thanks, everyone. I don't see any other questions, so I'm going to kick us all out. So thanks, everyone, and have a good Friday tomorrow.